I'm Dr. John Kruse, and today I'm talking about a serious matter, and that is ADHD kills people. So the take-home message is ADHD is a serious condition, but it's almost never lumped with serious mental illnesses. It doubles the risk of life-threatening accidents and suicide. It decreases longevity throughout the lifespan. And a new study was released looking at millions of people in Britain, confirming that ADHD reduces life expectancy. This was treated as news and newsworthy. I would say it's not new. We've had 20 years of data supporting this study. It is newsworthy in that often we don't look at the seriousness of ADHD. The last piece of the take-home message is treating ADHD effectively, particularly what's been studied as medications, does result in lower rates of suicidality, suicide actions, and lower rates of accidents back down to the general population levels. So, onto the main talk. Why is there a need for such a grim subject to be discussed? And I think there's different myths to combat here. One is the sort of the positive that ADHD is a superpower. It helps people be creative. It gives them energy, leads them to thinking outside of the box. It's only something wonderful, powerful. Some of this overlaps with the notion that ADHD, and I subscribe to this notion, that is a form of neurodivergence. So these are people whose brains are different. Maybe we shouldn't be pathologizing them. I'd agree with those two things. But in terms of how our current society is constructed, when ADHD brains are bumping up against current society, it is resulting in premature deaths. So, form of neurodivergence, but it's a form that is not working well with the current world on the very simplest level of, are you still alive? The second myth that's out there is that ADHD is just and it's somewhat conflicting with the other one, but not completely, is that ADHD is something trivial, that it's not a serious mental illness like schizophrenia or depression or bipolar, which lead to great dysfunction. And it is. Again, it kills people. The magnitude of premature death is similar with ADHD as it is with schizophrenia, depression, bipolar disorder, comparable to things like diabetes. And even when it's not killing people, we know that ADHD leads to substantial impairment in education, substantial impairment in career trajectories, substantial disruption of relationships. So rates of divorce, rates of never being married, rates of incarceration, all of those are substantially and significantly below the general population levels. Now, yes, ADHD is on a spectrum of severity. So people at milder end, and certainly ADHD is only ever one part of who an individual is. So you may have money, you may have intelligence, you may have good looks, you may have a wonderful support team and family, or you might have found a work situation that's right on target for you. So there are a host of other factors that may play a role in how much your ADHD symptoms interfere with you, but ADHD should not be dismissed as only positive. It should not be dismissed as something that's trivial. So again, there are numerous studies looking at, starting with accidents, that people with ADHD have more emergency room visits, again, about twice as many as people their same age. Serious car accidents are, again, about double for those with ADHD. All sorts of accidents, and again, treatment with medications, specifically stimulants, seems to reduce those back to background rates. And there's a very clear, robust correlation between minor accidents that need emergency room visits up to full-blown fatal accidents. So why do people with ADHD get into more accidents? Some of it's inattentiveness. They are less able or less adept at paying attention to clues. Is this a dangerous alley to be walking on? Is this field, the edge of it, next to a cliff rather than to a second field? Not being aware of the facial expressions or body language of the humans or animals around them. So inattentiveness can lead to accidents. Hyperactivity leads to accidents. The more you are moving around, bumping into people, you're more likely to trigger a negative social interaction. Impulsivity is clearly a big part in accidents. So impulsivity is discounting, so you're not thinking about the ramifications, implications, or even if you're aware of them, you're downplaying them for whatever's interesting, fun at the moment. And slightly different from that is risk-taking behavior. So people with ADHD, even if they know driving fast is dangerous, again, they may not be impulsively just at the spur of the moment stepping on the gas and speeding. They may be intentionally saying, I want to go drag racing tonight because it makes me feel alive and is exciting and fun to me. I do have a separate video here on suicide and ADHD, so I won't go into too much detail. Suicide isn't just about despair and depression, which is what we focus on all the time, including almost all the research on it. But there is good research that impulsivity is at least as big a contributor. And some of the best evidence for that is when we take away means of easily killing yourself. So in Britain, one of the most famous, not intentionally an experiment, but natural experiments, was when they switched away from coal gas providing energy source for homes, and coal gas was a very effective way of sticking your head in the oven and killing yourself. Switching to natural gas, which is much safer, not completely safe, decreased overall suicide rates dramatically. And again, that was an indication that impulsivity, it doesn't mean people were less sad or despairing. It means many of the people who are killing themselves are sad and despairing, but also acting in the spur of the moment impulsively. There are studies looking at addressing suicidality in people with ADHD by, if you take stimulant medications, your rate of suicidal actions and behaviors drops back to the general population level. There's also smaller amounts of data on other conditions. So murder seems you're more likely to be murdered if you have ADHD. You're more likely to contract a number of medical conditions, particularly autoimmune conditions. And that probably also plays some role in shortened longevity. Several years ago, Russell Barkley published a study, it was 2018, and they used actuarial tables. So they looked at different risk factors that we know are strongly associated with ADHD, such as rates of smoking, higher rates of obesity, higher rates of other factors closely associated with ADHD. And from the actuarial tables, and this is a well-established and valid way of projected life expectancy, they found life expectancy was reduced, depending on which specific measure, somewhere between about 8 to 12 years in the population of people with ADHD. Again, that is comparable to how many years schizophrenia shaves off someone's life. That's comparable to bipolar disorder, comparable to major depression, comparable to diabetes. So what was released just a few weeks ago, so I'm talking now in the March of 2025, there's a British population-wide study, so tens of millions of individuals were looked at, and they weren't just doing projections here, they actually looked at who was identified in medical records as having ADHD, and did they die earlier than was expected? And the short answer was those individuals with ADHD, males had about 6.7, almost 7 years shorter lives. Women, it was an even bigger impact of 8.64 years, so almost 9 years there. And they do identify that only about 1% of the population in those medical records was identified as having ADHD. That's certainly an undercount. And one of the concerns is maybe it only picks up only the most severe people with ADHD were the ones who get into the registry. So maybe this is reflecting only severe ADHD. That's a possibility. People with really extreme ADHD are often missed because it's so extreme or so severe, people can't believe that is ADHD and want to attribute it to panic attacks or mania or something else like that. So I'm not convinced that the 1% of the population who's winding up in the records with the diagnosis is actually the most severe individuals with ADHD. ADHD starts earlier in life than almost any other mental health, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, and it's affecting people every day, unlike depression, which most commonly is an episodic illness affecting people for months or even a few years at a time, but then remitting for months or years at a time. So you can present all the statistics you want, but anecdotes tend to stick with people more. They tend to make more of an impression. They're clearly pivotal in lots of public policy decisions, which is unfortunate. So, some people's decision not to take the COVID vaccine was Joe's brother-in-law was a young, healthy guy and got the vaccine and got really sick and had cardiomyopathy. Whether or not, even if that individual exists, some individuals like that did exist. Those were real individuals, did have bad outcomes from the vaccine. But if you do the science, if you do the epidemiology, it is robustly, manifestly clear by more than an order of magnitude, lives were saved by being vaccinated rather than contracting COVID without, or being exposed to COVID without being vaccinated. But anecdotes can be dramatic. They can convince people. One healthy young person who has a horrible outcome weighs in people's minds more heavily than the dozens and dozens of people who got the vaccine and then didn't get sick. So my 3 case studies. So all these individuals are real people. Some of the details have been changed to protect their anonymity. The names have been changed to protect their anonymity. First one I'm going to talk about is Matt. He was a PhD in science, a very educated, intelligent person, successful in the tech industry. And he came to treatment because of impulsivity and some relationship problems. And it was only then at the age of about 40 that he became aware of his ADHD. And the more we explored this, he became aware of multiple family members with multiple symptoms of ADHD, some fairly severe, and actually a family history of lots of sort of weird, clumsy, stupid, and not particularly clumsy in terms of uncoordinated, but bad, bizarre accidents happening, killing people. About a year or 2 into treatment, actually, Matt's 70-year-old father fell off the roof repairing it. He was in a coma for several days before dying, and Matt understandably felt terrible, but he also felt that he should have been the one going home to be fixing the roof. He was younger and healthier, even though Dad was actually more of a manual laborer and probably skilled at that. But putting the death in an ADHD context was terribly important for him and helpful in terms of understanding. And when he thought about it, Dad had had numerous other near-death experiences, from falls, from near electrocution or near death from electrocution, other things where he had acted either inattentively or impulsively or hyperactively, and that put him in dangerous situations, even though, again, he was a skilled craftsman. So it helped Matt not blame himself. Again, so this is an accident-caused death from ADHD, and it helped him understand his whole family legacy and reinforce the value to him of taking medication and probably reducing his own risk for death from accidents. So anecdote number 2. So Paul was actually the son of a patient of mine. At the age of 12, Paul hit his mother over the head with a skateboard. That was who he was living with. And this led to an ER psychiatric emergency crisis visit. But that healthcare system his parents had insurance in was so, I won't just say poor regarding mental health care. It actually took them 6 weeks to schedule an appointment with a social worker to evaluate whether he needed further treatment. This is, again, 6 weeks after a violent, impulsive episode that endangered his mother. The social worker evaluated him and decided he did need a child psychiatrist, more thorough evaluation. That didn't happen until 2.5 months, 75 days after the initial crisis. And then the psychiatrist was on vacation, so it was an additional 2 months before there was any medication or talking therapy effective treatment. My contention is that this intermittent treatment told Paul and his family that ADHD was relatively trivial, didn't matter, or that he himself was relatively trivial and didn't matter, and that they weren't going to do much about it. When he was on medications over the next 10 years, did better in school or did better in the jobs he was working in, was more communicative with family members and girlfriends, and stayed free of street drugs. But more than 90% of that decade, he was not taking medication. He was not going to any psychiatric appointments. He was dabbling with meth and marijuana. He started selling drugs. He got into other street crime, and he was actually jailed twice before he was age 22. When he was 22 and he still had warrants out for his arrest because he had violated his probation, he had parked his car in a mall parking lot. When he came back out, he noticed as he got into his car that there were cops around him. He was aware that there was a warrant for his arrest. Rather than surrendering, he impulsively slammed on the gas and actually hit one of the police officers, died in a hail of bullets from the police officers who felt they were, and I would say in this situation, justifiably reacted that their lives were in danger. So this, again, is a dramatic, sad case where ADHD directly led to someone's death. And I'd say more than just ADHD led to his direct death, that also ignoring, minimizing, treating ADHD as a non-serious mental health problem led to Paul's death. And certainly I can't play out his life differently, but again, given how he performed, how he interacted with others when on medications, it's very likely if he had steadily been on medications that he would be alive today. So Lucy, I met when I was running an outpatient medication group for a psychotherapy clinic. She had been in psychotherapy for about 6 months for depression after losing a job. They felt they were making no progress with her. They referred her for depression to this medication group. The procedure is I did an individual intake for each person before letting them into the group. During the initial evaluation, she was talking rapidly. She was jumping from topic to topic. She was clearly energetic. She was clearly intelligent, but she was tangential. She was distracted. She was not using any street drugs. I brought up the likelihood that in addition to her depression, it seemed like she had pretty strong and pervasive ADHD, which she adamantly refused. She said, nope, she had never been diagnosed. She had never been treated. It didn't seem likely. She was here just for depression. We allowed her into the group, which was a monthly medication group, usually 6 to 10 people. By the time she was in the group for 4 months, the other group members confronted her because she was always cutting others off. She was always talking nonstop and dominating the conversation. She was always fidgeting. She was always not listening to others. And she essentially broke down in the group and acknowledged that she had been diagnosed with ADHD as a child. She had been on medications, Ritalin then, but she had felt so stigmatized because of being different and being treated differently because she was on medication that she had just wanted to hide it, deny it, ignore it, and felt that if she just ignored it, it would go away or people wouldn't notice. The group members told her that that wasn't working very effectively. The outcome was that she did agree to go on some non-stimulant medications. Again, her past childhood experience scared her away from another trial of stimulants. And the non-stimulant medication for ADHD did help substantially, so that within a few more months, she was back in a job that was a much better fit. She had a meaningful relationship. Depression resolved. She was in the group. She was much calmer. She was able to wait her turn. She was able to regulate her emotions. And she did well enough that she moved out of state and left my practice and was out of state for a few years, working with an out-of-state psychiatrist. And then apparently, and this is pieced together, she lost her job. She lost her relationship. She was despairing. She flew back to San Francisco, and the only plan she had was to go to the emergency room and get admitted psychiatrically. So she didn't have a place to live. She didn't have anything else going on or working for her. When she was hospitalized, she was, as always, talking a mile a minute, talking loudly, interrupting others, very energetic, very emotionally unregulated as she had been off of medications, and they diagnosed her with mania, which, yes, this looked a lot like mania. She reached out to me. They didn't contact me, but she called me after several days in the hospital saying that they were drugging her with high doses of antipsychotics to make her slow down, and that they felt that she had mania, and that she felt that that was not at all accurate. And I actually spoke directly to the doctors and told them that over dozens and dozens of individual sessions with Lucy over a period of many years, every single time she was talking loud, she was talking fast, she was jumping from topic to topic, she was hyperactive, she was not attentive to other people around her, and that I've talked with family members of hers, her sister, and they reported that this is how she always was, that this was fairly severe ongoing ADHD. This was not manic. The doctor acknowledged that she was not showing any signs of saying things that were bizarre. There was not silliness. There was not grandiosity. There was not wordplay. There was not some of the other, and that she was actually sleeping 6 hours a day before they were sedating her so much. But he felt that she still was manic and that they would need to stabilize her mood, and they kept upping the sedating antipsychotic till her speech was slurring. So the last time I talked with her, she was very sedated. They did slow her down and make her look closer to a normal individual and discharged her in a heavily sedated state. The day after discharge from the hospital, Lucy went to the Golden Gate Bridge and jumped over it, feeling not just the despair, but also feeling completely misunderstood and trivialized and misdiagnosed by the hospital. So that is, again, a case of suicide. I would argue prompted, again, not just by ADHD, but by not recognizing ADHD. So again, this highlights the importance. ADHD kills people. That does not mean everyone with ADHD is going to die a horrible early death. But ADHD is not just something innocuous, not just something trivial, not just a superpower, and that we can't treat it properly until we identify it properly. So take care of yourself, be safe, have a good week, and I will be back with more videos.